A single dad hears a broken whisper from a frozen trunk. What he finds unravels a past, reshapes a future, and births a family from silence and scars. If stories like this stir your soul, subscribe for more unforgettable tales. The snow fell sideways, like it had changed its mind midair. Wind howled low through the cottonwoods and wrapped around Clay Mercer's truck like it meant to carry it off the road. The plow on the front blade scraped sparks from ice-covered gravel, but he kept a steady hand on the wheel, his eyes narrowed against the whiteout. He didn't mind the storms anymore. They made the world quiet, and Clay had learned how to live in quiet. He was coming back from the school where he worked the night shift, mopping endless tile halls, fixing heaters with wire and gumption, changing light bulbs no one noticed. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and steady was a blessing. Josie needed steady. Just past the bend near the boundary fence, something caught his eye. A shape not right. Not tree, not snowdrift. He eased off the gas. It was a car. Rust peeling down its flanks like rot. No plates. Its tires half sunk into slush and gravel. He would have seen it yesterday. This wasn't the kind of thing that slipped past Clay Mercer. He stopped the truck a few yards away and killed the engine. The silence roared. Something prickled between his shoulders. Not fear, exactly. Just unease, like the night was holding its breath. He opened his door. Snow whipped under his coat collar. The car was empty at first glance, windows fogged, front seat littered with fast food wrappers and a single red mitten stiff with ice. But it wasn't the interior that held him. It was the trunk. Scratched, dented, and sealed shut with a length of baling wire and prayer. Clay stepped close, put his gloved hand on the lid. A voice, barely more than breath. "She's too weak to beg." Clay staggered back a step, heart knocking once, hard. He glanced around. Nothing but trees and blowing snow. He leaned in again. "She's too weak." A girl's voice. Thin as paper. He didn't remember cutting the wire. Only the sound of it snapping, metal against metal, and the strange weight in his gut as he lifted the trunk open. She was curled like an injured animal inside. A girl no older than 11 or 12, wrapped in a thin coat soaked through, cheeks pale with more than cold. Her lips were cracked, eyes sunken and flickering between open and gone. One arm cradled a bundle of blankets. Not blankets. Another child, even smaller, barely breathing. Clay didn't think. He just acted. He scooped the older girl into his arms. She didn't resist. Didn't cry out. Just folded in on herself like she was used to being carried like this, like a weight and not a person. The bundle came next, light as air and terrifyingly still. The heater in the truck roared as he laid them across the back seat, brushing snow from their faces, fingers fumbling to check for breath. The baby, no, not a baby, just very small, had a pulse, faint but present. The girl had a deeper bruise along her temple. How long had they been out here? Clay drove home like the devil was chasing him. The cabin sat a mile down a gravel road, tucked against a pine-covered hill. Old cedar planks, one sagging porch beam, and a stovepipe that leaked smoke like a tired sigh. He carried the children inside, boots stomping snow into the worn entryway. Josie stood in the hallway, silent as always, her oversized flannel pajamas swallowing her frame. She gripped the railing of the staircase, eyes wide. "It's okay, sweetheart," Clay said, breath rough. "Go get the extra quilts. The thick ones." Josie turned without a sound and disappeared upstairs. He laid the girls near the wood stove, stoking the fire until it glowed fierce orange. Steam lifted from their clothes as they warmed. Clay peeled off their coats carefully, finding bruises beneath, old and new. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to, not yet. The older girl opened her eyes sometime before dawn. They were the kind of eyes that had seen too much. She didn't speak. She just looked around, locked eyes with Josie, who sat nearby hugging a chipped ceramic mug of warm milk, and then looked back at Clay. "I'm Clay," he said softly. "This here's Josie. You're safe." She blinked once. "I won't ask anything you're not ready to say. But I need to know, are you hurt anywhere I can't see?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then nodded once. She pointed to her ribs, then her wrist. Nothing broken, he hoped. Just battered, like something had tried to erase her. Clay brought a wet rag and gently cleaned the blood from her forehead. Her skin flinched under the touch, but she didn't pull away. The smaller girl was still asleep, curled like a comma on the blanket. Josie had tucked her own doll beside her. It had one eye and no mouth, just like Josie. "You got a name?" Clay asked the older girl. She looked at him, then away. "You don't have to give it," he said quickly. "Not yet." She reached into her coat pocket. Clay noticed her fingers trembling, not with cold now, but something else. She pulled out a torn, blood-specked envelope and handed it to him. It was addressed in blocky handwriting. "To Miss Ray. If she makes it to you, please read this before you judge." Clay's throat tightened. His fingers closed around the envelope, but he didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he nodded and tucked it into his coat pocket. She watched him do it. Her body relaxed. Not much, but just enough to see. Josie, sitting across the room, took her drawing pad and scribbled something. She walked it over, slow and careful, then handed the older girl a picture. A stick figure beside a house with smoke curling from the chimney. 3 smaller figures inside, holding hands. She pointed to the third one and looked up at the girl. The girl stared at the drawing, then down at Josie, then to Clay. A tear slipped down her cheek. She brushed it away angrily. Clay knelt beside her, wrapping a blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You don't have to speak," he said again. "But you're not alone now." The wind howled harder outside, rattling the porch like bones. Inside, the silence grew warm, heavy with something like grace. Clay stayed by the wood stove all night, just watching them sleep. Josie fell asleep first, curled on the rug with the one-eyed doll. The older girl followed, her body finally surrendering to the heat, to the safety, to the stillness. Clay didn't sleep. He sat there until the logs burned low and the light turned soft blue through the frost-covered window. And when he finally did rise to his feet, stretching aching knees and back, he touched the letter in his coat pocket without looking at it. He walked to the girl's door and stood outside for a long time. He didn't knock. He just stood there and listened to the silence. Then he whispered to the quiet, "You made it. That's enough for now." And the snow fell, gentler now, like even the storm had paused to breathe. The days after the girl arrived unfolded like smoke, shifting, silent, hard to hold. Clay marked time in small ways, the rise and fall of snow on the porch rail, the hum of the kettle, the way Josie's drawings began to fill the corners of the house again. Winter pressed down heavy, but inside their crooked cabin, something unfamiliar had begun to take root. Not comfort, not yet, but a kind of stillness that wasn't afraid to breathe. The girl hadn't given them a name. Clay started calling her Wren, after Josie scribbled a little bird next to her on a drawing and pointed insistently. If it. Wren moved like a bird, cautious, sharp-eyed, always just on the edge of flying away. She still hadn't spoken. Not since that breath of a voice in the trunk. But her silence didn't feel empty. It felt watchful, as if she was deciding whether the world here would hurt her like the last one did. She ate sparingly, drank hot broth like it was a debt she didn't want to owe. But she followed Josie from room to room like a shadow stitched to her heels. She watched Clay as he chopped wood, fixed the sputtering heater in the laundry room, and brushed snow off the porch each morning before the sun had the strength to melt anything. Clay never asked questions. He laid out extra socks near the fire, left an untouched book open beside her plate, cooked meals he thought small hands could manage. He offered her the kind of care that came without noise, without price. That was the only kind he knew how to give. Sometimes he'd catch Wren staring at a spot on the wall for minutes at a time, like she was seeing something that had happened there once. Or hadn't happened yet. Josie noticed, too. She'd sit beside her on the rug with her crayons and slowly, carefully, slide a page over. One day she drew a cabin with 3 figures in front. Then 4. Then a dog, even though they didn't have one. Each time, Wren would glance down at it, tuck her chin, and push the paper back with the smallest smile at the corner of her mouth. Clay saw it, that smile. It barely lasted a heartbeat, but it cracked something open in him. That night, he pulled the envelope from his coat pocket again. The letter meant for Miss Ray. He still hadn't opened it. He stood in the kitchen, steam rising off the sink, the letter limp in his fingers. He didn't read it, but he didn't burn it either. Instead, he tucked it into the cabinet behind the tea tins. Out of sight. Not gone, but not hanging over them either. The next day, Wren brushed Josie's hair. It happened with no prompting. Josie had been sitting on the floor in her pajamas, hair tangled from sleep. Wren knelt behind her, took the old wooden brush from the windowsill, and began, slowly, to work through the knots. Josie leaned into her like it was the most natural thing in the world. Clay watched from the hallway, one hand on the doorframe, breath stuck in his chest. Later, Josie handed Wren her music box, the one shaped like a crescent moon that hadn't played since her mother died. Clay had never been able to fix it, but Wren took it gently in both hands, twisted the key, and tilted it toward her ear. It played. The tune warbled and cracked, but it played. Wren didn't smile, but her hands trembled, and Josie clapped softly like she'd just seen magic. Clay stood in the yard the next morning, chopping wood with a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. The air smelled of pine and frozen earth. A red cardinal darted through the branches above, too bright for the gray world it flew through. Wren came outside in socks. "Hey," he said gently, setting the axe down. "You'll freeze out here." She didn't speak, just looked at the snow around her feet, then up at him. Then she stepped closer and said nothing, but opened her mouth once, shaped a word and closed it. "You don't have to explain," Clay said. "You don't need a reason to be warm." He went inside, returned with his late wife's old boots. They were too big, but he helped her into them anyway, lacing them tight while she stared at the crown of his cap. When he stood, she looked up, eyes glassy. She mouthed, "Thank you." He nodded. That was enough. That afternoon, Wren stood by the front window for nearly an hour. Not looking out exactly, just being still. Josie colored nearby, humming tunelessly, the sound soft as snow on old tin. Clay listened from the kitchen, his hands lost in warm dishwater. He realized then that the house sounded different now. Not louder, just less hollow. A few days later, Clay came home to find Wren standing at the sink, sleeves rolled, washing dishes in water gone cold. Josie dried. Neither said anything, but when Clay stepped into the room, Wren flinched as if caught doing something wrong. She looked at the floor, hands dripping. "You don't have to earn your stay," Clay said quietly. She didn't look up, but she didn't stop scrubbing either. That night, Clay pulled the old photo album from the high shelf, the one with pictures of Josie as a baby and of her mother, Delilah, smiling through tired eyes. He hadn't opened it in years. He left it on the coffee table and went to bed without saying a word. The next morning, the album was open. A single picture missing. In its place, Wren had drawn something on the back of an envelope. A girl standing in front of a house, holding hands with a smaller girl, a tall figure with a cowboy hat behind them. A bird perched on the roof. Clay didn't ask which page she'd taken the photo from. He didn't need to. That evening, while Clay shoveled the porch steps, a truck passed slow down the road. Not local. New tires. Out-of-county plates. It didn't stop, but something about the way it slowed sent cold down his spine. Inside, Josie and Wren played checkers. Wren didn't know all the rules, but Josie let her win anyway. Clay leaned against the doorframe that night, watching them sleep in the living room. Wren had taken to dozing on the couch near Josie's pallet on the floor. They drifted off with the music box open between them, its lullaby echoing low and broken. The fire cracked softly. Outside, the snow began again. He turned away, went to the kitchen, and stared at the envelope behind the tea tins. Then he pulled it out, turned it in his hands. The seal was already loosened. He didn't open it. Not yet. But he whispered to it. "Tomorrow. Maybe." When he returned to the living room, he found something that stopped him in his tracks. Wren had taken Josie's old doll, the one with no mouth, and stitched a smile into its face. Uneven, crooked, red thread messy from small fingers. But it was a smile. Clay sank into the chair by the fire and let himself breathe for the first time in weeks. Outside, the snow softened the world again. Inside, two girls dreamed beside each other. And Clay Mercer began to believe that some things, quiet things, broken things, might still find their way back to warmth. The thaw came slowly, as if the earth itself had trust issues. Snowmelt slid in silver lines off the porch roof, pooling near the steps before freezing again each night. The cabin no longer groaned under the weight of snow, but it still felt like it was holding its breath. Clay sat on the edge of the bed one morning, the envelope in his hands again. It had become part of his routine, like checking the woodpile or listening for Josie's soft footsteps. He didn't open it. Not yet. But he could feel the weight of it changing. Not heavier, just louder. It whispered from the pocket of his coat. From behind the tea tins. From under the quiet of every moment Wren dared to trust him. That morning, Wren had made pancakes. Josie stood beside her on a stool, guiding her hand with the spatula, both girls barefoot and glowing in firelight. The scene hurt in a way Clay couldn't name, because it was beautiful and because it was temporary. The knock came just before noon. 3 firm raps, then silence. Clay stiffened, his hand pausing mid-reach for the kettle. Wren dropped the spatula. Josie froze. Clay opened the door. Sheriff Dawson stood on the porch in his wool coat, breath puffing white. He had that look, sincere concern with a side of suspicion. He wasn't a bad man. Just the kind who believed every question deserved an answer, even if the truth hurt more than the lie. "Morning," he said, shifting his weight. Didn't mean to drop in unannounced. Clay nodded, saying nothing. He leaned against the frame and didn't invite him in. "There's a girl missing," Dawson said, getting to the point. 2, actually. Sisters. Been gone a few weeks. The older one's 12. Last seen near the state line. Wren, listening from the kitchen, stepped quietly into the pantry and pulled the door closed behind her. Josie stared at Clay, unblinking. Clay kept his voice even. "That's so." Dawson squinted past him into the warmth of the cabin. "Thought I'd check in. Sometimes folks find a runaway and don't know what to do." "Sometimes," Clay said. "You see anything strange lately? A car maybe?" Clay shook his head once. "Not a lie, exactly. The car was gone. Towed out a week ago when he'd taken the long way back from town and pushed it off the service road with his plow. Nothing but tracks in the snow now, and even those were gone." Dawson sighed. "Just trying to get her home. Word is she's in real danger. Folks don't always take care of their own." Clay's jaw ticked. Sometimes they do more harm than strangers ever could. They stood in the cold a moment longer, the wind between them like a third man deciding who would speak next. "If you hear anything," Dawson said, slipping a card into Clay's hand, "give me a ring." Clay pocketed it without looking. The sheriff nodded, turned, and walked back to his cruiser. When the taillights disappeared around the bend, Clay closed the door and let out a breath that shook him. Wren stepped out of the pantry. Her hands were fists. Her eyes too calm. Clay looked at her. "It's okay." She shook her head slowly. Later, when the girls had gone upstairs for rest, Clay took the envelope outside. The woods behind the cabin were quiet, branches dripping in slow surrender to spring. He stood beside the fire pit, staring at the letter like it was a living thing. He opened it. The paper inside was creased and stained, the ink smudged in places. It began, "If you're reading this and she made it to you, I'm sorry. Her name is Maribel. Mine's Tessa. I'm her sister. We didn't know who else to turn to. I heard about a woman named Miss Ray from someone at a shelter. Said she helps girls disappear. But we never made it that far. Someone came for her. I panicked. I told her to run. I put her in a car trunk with what little I could find. I was supposed to follow. I didn't make it. If she's with you, please, let her stay. She's been through more than any child should. Don't judge her for the silence. She's trying to survive." Clay read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it gently, set it in the fire pit, and lit a match. The flames caught slowly, curling the corners first. He watched it burn down to a whisper of ash. He didn't need a reason to keep her. He just needed to make sure no one ever had a reason to take her away. That night he made stew. Wren sat beside the hearth, stitching something with red thread. Josie handed him a drawing, this time of a campfire, the 3 of them beside it, and in the sky above, stars, not snow. Before bed, Wren approached him with careful steps. She held something out. It was the photo she'd taken from the album, one of Delilah, holding Josie on her hip, sun pouring across their faces. Wren had added a fourth figure in pencil. A girl. Off to the side. Watching them. Clay took the photo, thumb brushing the pencil lines. Wren looked up and whispered, "My name is Maribel." It was the first word she'd spoken aloud since the night in the trunk. Clay knelt slowly. "Maribel?" he repeated. She nodded. "I'm not sending you back." Her breath shook. "They'll come." He nodded. "Then we'll make it hard for them to find you." She stared at him like she didn't quite believe it, but wanted to. He placed a hand over hers. "I don't break promises." She whispered, "I don't know how to be here." "You don't have to know. Just be." Upstairs, Josie called for him with a gentle knock on the railing. Her bedtime ritual. He stood, tousled Maribel's hair gently, and climbed the steps. Behind him, she remained by the fire, her hands pressed to her own chest like she was holding something fragile from the inside. The sheriff didn't return that week, but Clay knew it wouldn't be long. He used the time. Taught Maribel how to sand the edge of a board in the garage, how to use the level, how to carry the weight of something without hurting herself. She didn't smile much, but sometimes her eyes softened. That was enough. She asked about the birdhouses hanging on the old pine tree. Clay said, "Josie and I built those the year after we lost Delilah. Gave the birds a place to start over." Maribel nodded once. In the evenings, the three of them read by firelight. Josie mouthing the words, Maribel tracing them with her finger, Clay watching both and pretending not to cry when he did. And on a night when the wind was still, and the stars cracked the dark like silent bells, Maribel turned to him on the porch and said, "You're not like the men I knew." Clay stared at the hills. "I'm just a man trying not to mess up again." She didn't answer, but she leaned her shoulder against his arm, just enough to feel real. Inside, the music box played. And for the first time, he believed they might make it past the thaw. The river behind the cabin had begun to run again. Not loud, not rushing, just whispering its thaw along the banks, soft as breath on glass. Birds had returned to the trees, tentative and quiet, as if uncertain whether the land could still hold life. Spring came gently in the mountains, like a hand outstretched, waiting to be trusted. Clay marked the days in pencil on the inside of the kitchen pantry, faint tick marks only he cared to count. The last time he'd circled a date had been a long time ago, Josie's 3rd birthday, the one Delilah missed by 6 days. This year, Josie would turn 7. She hadn't said a word about it. No drawings with cake, no notes tucked under his pillow. But Clay saw it in the way she lingered at the window, staring out across the damp fields, and in the way she folded her clothes extra neatly at the end of her bed. A quiet ritual of wanting, the kind that never asked aloud. He decided they'd celebrate anyway. Nothing loud. Just enough to show her that the world still held room for joy, even if it had to be stitched together from broken things. Maribel helped. She asked to. They made paper garlands from the newspaper pile in the shed, each loop a tiny miracle of scissors and tape. Maribel found a box of old buttons in Delilah's sewing tin and strung them into a necklace with Josie's name spelled crooked in mismatched beads. Josie watched, curious but not quite hopeful, as if the idea of something just for her hadn't finished blooming in her mind yet. Clay baked the pie himself, apple, because that's what he remembered Delilah used to make. The crust burned at the edges. He left it that way. Imperfection, after all, was the only honest kind of celebration they knew. They cleaned the barn. Josie swept with a determination that had nothing to do with dust. Maribel hung lanterns made from old jars and twine. Clay set the wood stove to burning and spread a worn quilt over the hay bales. That morning, Josie woke early and stood in the kitchen doorway while the sun slid soft across the floor. She didn't speak, but she held something out, a card, drawn in bold crayon, with 3 stick figures holding hands and a crooked heart above their heads. On the back, in careful block letters, she had written, "Family." Clay's throat tightened. He bent to kiss the top of her head. She pressed the card against his chest and stayed there a moment longer than usual. Later, as the pie cooled on the windowsill and the barn filled with warmth and paper chains, Clay saw headlights. The truck came up the road slow. Not Sheriff Dawson's cruiser. A different model. Dark windows. The kind of truck that didn't belong on a mountain road unless it was looking for something it shouldn't find. Maribel stood frozen by the barn door, her body already folding in on itself. Clay met her eyes. Inside. Now. He didn't yell. He didn't run. He moved like a man who'd already made the choice. He stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed, weight balanced on the balls of his feet like he used to stand back when things still required a fight. The truck didn't stop at the gate. It passed by, slowly, tires crushing gravel like bones. The driver never looked over. But Clay knew they'd be back. That night, Maribel asked to be called by her real name again. They were sitting on the porch steps, the sky above them stretching wide and lavender. Clay had just finished lighting the candles on the pie, and Josie had clapped, soft and sincere. Maribel leaned toward him, voice barely audible over the frogs tuning in the streambed. My name is Maribel. You know that now. He nodded. You gave me enough safety to remember it. Clay didn't answer with words. He just reached into his back pocket and handed her a folded slip of paper. She opened it. A crude birth certificate, scribbled in his handwriting. No seal. No signature. Just a name, Maribel Ray Mercer. She stared at it. Her hands shook. You're not property anymore, he said. Your family. Josie stood then, walked over, and laid her music box in Maribel's lap. The little moon-shaped one with the chipped silver lid. She hadn't given it to anyone since the night Delilah left. Now, she looked at Maribel and nodded once. The box played. Not the full tune, but enough. That was the moment everything quieted. They held the birthday in the barn, just the three of them, with candlelight dancing against the old wooden walls and hay bales dressed in quilts. Josie blew out the candles. Clay didn't ask what she wished for. Maribel sang half a verse of You Are My Sunshine, voice tremulous but there. Josie hummed along. Clay wiped his eyes when no one was looking. Afterward, they opened gifts. Maribel gave Josie the button necklace. Clay gave her a scarf, hand-sewn from pieces of Delilah's old flannel shirts. Josie wrapped it around her neck and smiled, wide, toothy, brighter than any word she'd ever lost. That night, Maribel found Clay sitting on the porch, hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee. I saw the truck, she said. He nodded. You think they'll come back? Maybe. What will we do? Clay didn't answer right away. He looked at her, saw the curve of her shoulders, the rise of strength beneath fear. He saw the girl she was, the woman she might become if the world just left her be. We'll do what we have to, he said. She sat beside him. After a long pause, she whispered, You ever wish you'd done things different? All the time. She turned toward him. Like what? I wish I'd spoken up when Delilah first cried in the bathtub. I wish I hadn't told Josie everything was okay when it wasn't. I wish I'd learned earlier that silence doesn't mean peace. Maribel said nothing for a long time. Then, I used to pray someone would find me. But I stopped. Thought maybe I was asking too much. Clay turned toward her, eyes lined with where. You weren't. She exhaled, sharp but steady. Then why do I still feel like I have to earn this? Because people taught you that love had a price. But it doesn't. Not here. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Josie called from upstairs. Clay rose, bones creaking, and said, Time for bed. Maribel stayed out a little longer, watching the trees. She didn't notice Clay leave a letter on the kitchen table that night, addressed only to the man I used to be. And so, you failed her. You failed all of them. But you didn't stay failed. You got back up. You made a place where broken things grow. That counts for something. Maybe everything. Signed, the man you're becoming. The next morning, the river sang louder. Josie found a bird's nest on the windowsill, 3 tiny eggs in it, pale blue and trembling. She pointed. Maribel stood beside her. They didn't say anything. Clay watched from the steps, arms crossed against the chill. The wind picked up again, but it didn't feel cold. It felt like a page turning. And as the sun reached the porch, warming the wood beneath their feet, Maribel whispered the one thing she had never said before. I want to stay. Clay didn't respond. He just opened the door behind them and let her walk through it first. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share where you are watching from.